William Stokes hadn't expected that morning to be the turning point of his career. 15 years as a dedicated mentor and employee at Brigham Industries, and his life was about to be shattered by a single accusation. The rural office where he worked hummed with the sounds of clacking keyboards and whispered conversations, but none of that noise penetrated the storm brewing in his head. His supervisor, Joey Riggs, had called him into the conference room that day with an ominous tone. Joey was a stocky man, the kind that enjoyed authority, but he wasn't the source of William's current predicament. It was Ben, the affable, underhanded snake of a colleague who had lured William into a trap. William remembered the moment so clearly. Ben had been in charge of a project that had seen modest success, and Caitlin, a bright and driven junior employee, had been placed under William's mentorship. She was sharp, witty, and eager to learn, a rare blend of youthful energy and natural intelligence. They'd gotten along well, too well, in Ben's eyes. It was no secret Ben had wanted to mentor Caitlin himself, and when he didn't get the chance, jealousy sparked in his heart. Over time, that spark had fanned into a fire. Small, innocent interactions between William and Caitlin were twisted, rumors spread like wildfire, and before William could understand what was happening, he was accused of abusing his power. Joey, always quick to avoid controversy, didn't hesitate to side with Ben. William was stripped of his role as a mentor and relegated to the rural branch, a distant outpost of the company, far from the central office where decisions were made. Caitlin had been shocked when William was removed. She had reached out, her messages full of confusion and concern. But William, now deeply aware of how even their proximity could be misinterpreted, had kept his distance. The final blow came when they were spotted together in a coffee shop, a chance meeting. Within days, William's name was on a company blacklist, the mark of someone whose reputation had been irreparably damaged. As William packed up his desk that fateful day, his mind replayed Joey's cold words, "We're making a decision that's best for the company, William." It's not personal. But it felt personal. Every betrayal did. The rural branch was quiet, almost ghostly in comparison to the bustling city office. It was a place where careers were sent to die, and William knew it. He spent his first weeks trying to adjust, burying himself in the mundane tasks assigned to him. The weight of isolation, both physical and emotional, bore down on him. The colleagues he met at the rural branch were a mixed bunch. There was Sarah, a meticulous woman with an air of resignation about her, and Daniel, an older employee who spent more time looking out the window than at his computer screen. Slowly, William began to piece together their stories. They too had been falsely accused, Sarah of leaking confidential documents and Daniel of harassment, both charges as flimsy and contrived as his own. In this quiet exile, William began to see the pattern. It wasn't just about individual mistakes or misunderstandings. It was about a system that thrived on keeping the ambitious at bay, silencing voices that stood in the way of others' rise to power. Joey and Ben weren't anomalies, they were part of a broader culture of manipulation, and William had been one of many to fall victim. Years passed, and though William continued to do his job diligently, he felt the heavy burden of stagnation. Yet, during those long years, he didn't waste his time. He enrolled in online courses, eventually earning an international law qualification, something to keep his mind sharp, something to hold onto. It was the only thing that gave him hope that someday, somehow, he could return to a life of meaning. The turning point came in an unexpected form. Morgan Hart, one of Brigham Industries' elite managers, was scheduled to visit the rural branch for an inspection. It was a rare event, almost no one from the main office ever ventured this far. William was tasked with preparing materials for the visit. It was supposed to be routine, but William approached it with the same meticulous care he had applied to everything in his career. He stayed late, refining every slide, perfecting the narrative of the branch's achievements, no matter how small they were. When Morgan arrived, her sharp eyes missed nothing. She was known as a formidable woman in the company, respected and feared in equal measure. But what surprised her wasn't the state of the branch, it was the presentation that William had prepared. She lingered after the meeting, asking questions that went deeper than the typical corporate pleasantries. When she learned about William's law qualification, her interest piqued. A week later, William was called back to the main office. Morgan had made a decision that would change everything. She wanted William on her team, working alongside her to manage the company's international expansion. For the first time in nearly a decade, William felt something close to joy. His exile was over. Returning to the main office was a surreal experience. The air of ambition and competition was palpable, a stark contrast to the sleepy rural branch. But what struck William most was the familiar faces, some welcoming, others guarded. And then there was Caitlin. She hadn't changed much in appearance, but her eyes held a weight that hadn't been there before. They met by chance in the hallway, and in that brief moment, everything from the past rushed back. Her voice was soft, careful, as she asked if they could speak in private. They met at a cafe far from the office, this time with no risk of suspicion hanging over them. Caitlin wasted no time. "William, I owe you an apology. I should have fought harder for you back then. I didn't understand everything that was happening. I didn't know how far Ben and Joey had gone." William listened in silence, the bitterness of the past welling up inside him. But as Caitlin spoke, something else became clear: she had never stopped caring for him. The years had taken their toll on both of them, but the connection they had once shared still flickered. "I've thought about you a lot," Caitlin admitted. "I never had the chance to say it, but I always had feelings for you. I just didn't know how to deal with them back then. Everything got so complicated." Her confession lingered in the air, raw and vulnerable. William took a deep breath. He had spent years trying to bury the pain of his past, but hearing Caitlin's words brought something new, a sense of closure, and perhaps, a chance at a new beginning. Their relationship didn't rekindle overnight, but the bond between William and Caitlin grew stronger with each passing day. They started slowly, with tentative dinners, long conversations about their shared history, and dreams for the future. The weight of betrayal and misunderstanding slowly lifted, replaced by the warmth of companionship and trust. A year later, they were married in a small, intimate ceremony. Their love, once marred by the shadows of false accusations and deceit, had blossomed into something enduring. Together, they built a life, had children, and found solace in the family they created. William's career had taken a new direction under Morgan's mentorship, and with his expertise in international law, he became a key figure in the company's expansion. But he never forgot the colleagues he had met during his years in exile. Many were still languishing in the rural branches, their talents wasted, their reputations tarnished. With Morgan's support, William began advocating for their cases to be reinvestigated. One by one, he fought for the truth to come out, and slowly, justice was served. Just as life seemed to settle into a comfortable rhythm, an unexpected development shook the foundations of William's newfound peace. Ben resurfaced, but not in the way William had expected. Ben hadn't been content with his earlier treachery. In the years since William's fall, Ben had climbed the corporate ladder, building his reputation on a web of manipulation. He now held a senior position, but his methods had grown more insidious. Whispers of corruption and ethical violations began surfacing, though they were swiftly buried by those who owed Ben favors or feared his wrath. When William returned to the main office, Ben had initially kept his distance. Perhaps he believed William wouldn't be a threat. After all, he'd been humiliated once, and men like Ben assumed that a man beaten once could be beaten again. But William's growing influence under Morgan's wing made him nervous. More importantly, William's quiet campaign to reinvestigate the wrongful accusations from the past threatened to unearth things Ben thought were long buried. The final blow came when William discovered a trail of falsified documents linked to Ben. It had taken months of subtle inquiry and careful observation, but William had found the proof he needed, evidence of how Ben had framed him all those years ago, twisting innocuous emails and conversations with Caitlin to make William look like a predator. Armed with this new information, William faced a difficult choice. He could expose Ben and risk plunging himself and Caitlin back into the storm of public scandal, or he could let it go, allowing Ben to continue his destructive path, but protect the fragile peace he had built for his family. William wasn't the same man he had been 9 years ago, though. He'd learned that staying silent only served the wicked. He knew, too, that he wasn't alone this time. Caitlin stood by his side, unwavering in her support. Together, they decided that Ben's reign of deceit had gone on long enough. William brought the evidence to Morgan, carefully laying out the case. Morgan's face was a mask of professionalism, but he could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. She despised dishonesty, especially when it poisoned the company she had worked so hard to build. After a brief but tense investigation, Ben was called to account before the company's board. The fallout was swift and brutal. Ben, once so smug and secure, found his carefully constructed empire crumbling beneath him. His connections couldn't save him now. The lies were too deep, the betrayals too obvious. Joey, who had also played his part in William's downfall, was implicated as well. Both men were dismissed from the company in disgrace, their reputations shattered beyond repair. For William, it was a bittersweet victory. While there was a sense of justice in seeing the truth finally come to light, the scars of the past still remained. He had lost years of his life to exile and false accusations, time that could never be recovered. Yet, with Ben and Joey gone, the weight of that injustice began to lift. With Ben and Joey out of the picture, the company underwent a period of intense introspection. Morgan, recognizing the deep-seated issues within the corporate culture, spearheaded a reform initiative aimed at rooting out the toxic elements that had allowed people like Ben to thrive. William became a key figure in this effort, using his legal expertise and personal experience to help craft new policies that prioritized fairness, transparency, and accountability. Meanwhile, William and Caitlin continued to build their life together. Their home was filled with the laughter of their children, a symbol of the love they had fought so hard to protect. The shadows of the past no longer hung over them, though they were never far from their thoughts. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their countryside home, watching their children play in the fading light, Caitlin turned to William. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if things had gone differently? If Ben hadn't interfered?" William considered her question for a moment before shaking his head. "I used to," he admitted. "But now I see that everything that happened, all the pain and struggle, brought us here. It made us stronger. I wouldn't change that." Caitlin smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Neither would I." Their love had been forged in fire, tempered by betrayal and heartache. But now, in the quiet moments of their life together, they found peace. They had both been tested, both scarred by the cruelty of others, but they had emerged on the other side, wiser, stronger, and more united than ever. Years passed, and William's influence within the company continued to grow. His name, once synonymous with scandal, now commanded respect. He had become a trusted advisor to Morgan and a champion for those who had been wronged. His efforts to reform the company's culture had led to lasting change, and the stories of false accusations that had once been so common were now a thing of the past. But even as William's professional life flourished, he remained haunted by the long shadows of his past. The scars of betrayal, while no longer fresh, were still there, lurking beneath the surface. He couldn't forget the colleagues he had met at the rural branch, the ones whose stories had ended in resignation or defeat. Some had never had the chance to clear their names, their careers ruined by the same forces that had tried to destroy him. One such person was Sarah, the woman who had been falsely accused of leaking documents. After William's return to the main office, he had lost touch with her. He hadn't forgotten her, though, and he often wondered what had become of her. One afternoon, while sorting through some old files, William came across a faded piece of paper. It was a note from Sarah, written in her neat, precise handwriting. It simply read, "Thank you for listening." William hadn't realized then how much that note would come to mean to him. He had been her only ally in a world that had turned its back on her, and though he had tried to help her, he hadn't been able to save her from the system that had consumed them both. Now, years later, William felt a renewed sense of responsibility. He couldn't change the past, but he could ensure that no one else would suffer the same fate. With Morgan's support, he launched a new initiative, an independent review board to investigate cases of wrongful accusations within the company. It was his way of honoring the people like Sarah and Daniel, those who had been left behind in the wake of corporate ambition. The board became a powerful tool for justice, and over the next few years, several more cases were reopened. Some of William's former colleagues from the rural branch were exonerated, their names finally cleared. It was a long, painstaking process, but for William, it was a necessary one. He had learned that redemption wasn't just about clearing your own name, it was about helping others find their way back to the light. As the years went by, William grew older, his hair graying at the temples, but his resolve never wavered. He had built a life filled with love, purpose, and meaning, despite the obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. In the end, William found peace not in the absence of conflict, but in the quiet knowledge that he had done everything in his power to make the world a little bit better, a little bit fairer. He had fought for the truth, not just for himself, but for those who had been silenced, and in doing so, he had found his own redemption. William stood by the window of his office, watching the sunset over the city. His career at Brigham Industries had taken him to heights he never could have imagined during those dark days in the rural branch. He had risen above the lies and betrayal, had built a family and a legacy that he was proud of. Beside him, a framed photo of his family, a snapshot of happiness captured in time, served as a reminder of what truly mattered. He smiled to himself, knowing that while the shadows of the past would always be there, they no longer held any power over him. The road to redemption had been long and winding, but it had led him here, to a place of peace. And for that, William was grateful. If you liked this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.